Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to round 7 of the Swarbrick.com former Alpha Championship. I do apologise for the lack of qualifying running in this evening's stream. We had a couple of issues with our external streaming software. Nothing in our control, really. We were able to get those resolved in the end, though, so I'm pleased to at least give you the very end of qualifying here. I can tell you it is Matt Daly, perhaps unsurprisingly, on pole here. Alan Matthews, P2. Andrew Brammer, P3. Apologies, that might be Paul Brady, P3. That is Paul Brady, P3. Then we have Barry Clayton, P4. Alex Smith, P5. Jack Hodson, P6. Paul Millman, P7. And Guy Swarbrick, P8. I would like to mention Guy was valiantly helping us get the streaming issues resolved during a large majority of his qualifying session here. So he might have lost a position or two as a result of our issues there, so can't really hold him accountable for that qualifying position. Still running it in P8 though, still obviously some points to grab there, and still in the mix for the race coming up in just a moment. We are of course here at Brazil for round 7. One of the last rounds to go in this championship already, would you believe it? It's a championship that has been rather dominated by Matt Daly at certain points, so we'll have a look at that in just a moment as we get ready for race 1. So stay there, we'll have another brief interval, and get ready for race 1 in just a moment's time. So here we are then, ladies and gentlemen, just under 1 minute to go now until lights out here at the Interlagos circuit, and it's Matt Daly and Alan Matthews lining up on the front row here for what should be a fantastic evening's worth of racing action. Of course, Sao Paolo never disappoints in terms of some fantastic racing. We've got to watch out though for that turn 1. The track pinches a little bit and it can get a little bit tight. Drivers might have the odd bit of paint trading or two, but then we have a pretty clean run all the way down towards turn 4, that tight, twisty middle sector before you have the dash down to the line once again. That's all in a little while though, because we have 6 red lights on the gantry at the start of the lap. And we are away here for race 1 in Interlagos. It's Alan Matthews and Matt Daly on the front row, but Alan Matthews dropping back ever so slightly as we head through that first corner. It's now Paul Brady against Barry Clayton, and there is Will Inglis in the mix as well. No, that is in fact Alan Matthews in Will Inglis's car. I was about to say it's a shame not to have Will Inglis with us this evening, but he is carrying Will Inglis's torch. It is Alan Matthews, but it's Paul Brady who gets the better run down towards the 4th corner here. The push-to-pass system already in deployment as Guy Swarbrick and Paul Millman have a big big coming together there, and they start the race on the back foot then, a few seconds down off the rest of the field already. Meanwhile, Paul Millman, who's already just had that crash, Paul Brady is about a second away from Matt Daly at the start of the race here. It's been a strong start for Matt Daly as ever. It's what we've come to expect. It's been a strong season and a strong start in this race as well. That points tally, by the way, 250 points, gives him an over 50-point margin heading into this race in the championship with just a couple of rounds to go. You have to wonder whether anyone can surpass him without Matt Daly just not deciding to attend the final couple of rounds, which I hope he does, because we thoroughly deserve this year's championship. He's driven a fantastic season so far. As we now head onto that start-finish straight once again, it's 1 second ahead of Paul Brady. Alan Matthews not too far behind at all. He lost a little bit of time at the start, but is doing his best to close that gap towards Paul Brady. Perhaps, taking the lead from Matt Daly. Maybe could have been done on the start, but after that it would have been a near nigh-on possible task, I think, to maintain that later on into the race. So he's had to drop back to P3 here, but if he can get back up to P2, that's maybe what he would have been expecting from this race this evening. Give a shout out to those in the midfield here, Alex Smith and Barry Clayton. Alex Smith under pressure from Jack Hodson here. The midfield action is often just as exciting as what's going on at the front end of the field. That's where we see some of our closest racing action, in fact, as we see Barry Clayton is in a good position here in this race so far. He's not on a podium scoring position just yet, but he's only a few tenths down from Alan Matthews, and perhaps more importantly has got not an entirely safe margin, but a little bit more of a comfortable margin to Alex Smith, the car behind. So he is ready to capitalise on any mistakes that might arise from further ahead in the field. As this could be likewise for Barry Clayton, for Jack Hodson, this could be an important position as well if he is able to get ahead of Alex Smith. What we've seen now, Alex Smith at various points so far this season has demonstrated fantastic one-lap pace. I'd argue as well, and particularly in the last couple of seasons, he's really improved on that race pace as well later into the running. It was often, in the early years, he could set blistering qualifying laps, and at certain stages of the race could absolutely fly along, but wasn't able to string together the races. This time, though, he seems to have, or at least this season, seems to have absolutely nailed it so far. He's currently running in P5. Should mention, been a little while since we mentioned it. Alex Smith, of course, running on a PS5 controller. Not a typical sim rig, but it's clearly working for him. It's what he prefers. So currently running in P5 on a PS5 controller for Alex Smith. Barry Clayton, meanwhile, about 7 tenths down on Alan Matthews, and commentator's curse in full effect there. That is running towards the end of Sector 2, and unfortunately for Barry Clayton, that has cost him substantially in this race. Of course, fighting just a moment ago for a spot on the podium, now finds himself all the way down in P6. A bit of a disaster for him. Still a decent pace under his belt in terms of his best lap so far. Of course, we're already a couple of laps into this race, but I can tell you it was a 1:16.7, that of course being the previous lap. We're only a couple of laps in, but compared to the cars around him, they're in the 17s, in the 18s, so actually currently fastest car on track before that off was Barry Clayton. This lap won't be representative at all, but we could see some good things here in this middle stint from Barry Clayton. Meanwhile, at the top end of the field, it's Matt Daly who still leads by about 1 second, and this is a mighty effort from Paul Brady here, has quickly dispatched of Alan Matthews and is now very much set his sights on Matt Daly, that car up in front. 8 tenths now. He's really putting the pressure on. 16.5, that predicted lap time, as you can see in the bottom left hand of your screen there. And on this lap, losing a decent amount of time compared to Matt Daly here, now possibly in the grasp of Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews, of course, that slow start early on might have cost him a little bit, but he is able to claw some time back now. Here we go then, on that previous lap, Alan Matthews into the 16s, our fastest man so far out on track, a 16.4, a comparison to Paul Brady's 17.9, not the strongest start for Paul Brady. Apologies, not the strongest start, shall I say, still a decent start for him. But in this middle stint, are we seeing one of the more interesting aspects, I think, of the racing here in the single-seater series. We do run one compound at a time. That tyre compound is usually pretty good at getting through the races. But you don't want to treat it too harshly. You can overheat the tyres. You can, at least in the middle of your stint, kind of write off some of your pace. And are we seeing that now from Paul Brady in that effort to keep up with Matt Daly? Has he just used too much of his tyres here, as we see now on that push-to-pass system? And now, could it be under the grasp of Alan Matthews? Let's have a look now on this next lap. It was a 16.9, so a decent pickup in pace for Paul Brady there, but unfortunately for him, Alan Matthews keeping up there with a high 16.8. It was an 8.98, so for all intents and purposes, it was a 16.9 there, so pretty much matching each other. In fact, the top three very close together in terms of pace. And of course, you can follow along with our timing system. It is aroc2.emperorservers.com/live-timing. If you want to have a look at what the driver's last laps, best laps, delta to cars around each other, and position on track are, that is aroc2.emperorservers.com/live-timing. And there you can see exactly what I'm seeing in terms of what is going on track. About 6/10 separating now Paul Brady and Alan Matthews, as we see these two really building a gap now to that midfield. That midfield now being led by Alex Smith. Alex Smith just ahead of Jack Holton and Barry Clayton. Barry Clayton hasn't quite had the same kind of climb through the field that we would have expected of him. You know, he had really strong pace at the start of this race. I don't believe he made any contact with a barrier when he went off. He could have just kissed a tyre barrier somewhere, and that maybe has affected his aero enough to constitute this pace disadvantage now he's now running with. I'd be shocked if he's lost 1.5 seconds. He's now brought that down to about half a second. That last lap was a 17.2. So we have the reverse commentator's curse in effect here, which I hope for his sake is the case, because we saw some good pace at the start for Barry Clayton, so it'd be a shame to see his race come to such a premature end. Certainly hasn't for Matt Daly just yet, who's now leading by 2.2 seconds. Of course, we're only 10 minutes into this race, so we haven't quite seen the dart off into the distance that has, of course, been present in the past, shall we say. But it's good control of the race so far by Matt Daly. We might see that later on into the race. Of course, if he is going 100% pace, we might see his tyres drop off later on, and that could hurt him. But as it stands, good control of the race, if not a big safety margin, although it's very rare that we see an error from Matt Daly when he's not under pressure here, which I wouldn't argue that he's under too much pressure at this stage. He's running very nicely indeed. Unfortunately, to see Paul Millman and Guy Swarbrick haven't quite been able to recover in the way that perhaps they would have wanted to. That early race incident, of course, damaging their cars and knocking their confidence a little bit as well. And without kind of cars in front to use as a reference or a bit of a target, it's difficult to get that pace back underfoot, and unfortunately, this brings a bit of a premature end to their race. Of course, they can make up for it totally later on in the reverse grid race, race 2, coming up in just about 20 minutes now, when the order is entirely reversed and those at the back have a chance to run out at the front, see what they're made of, and see some more excellent racecraft on display. Speaking of excellent racecraft now, it's Paul Brady versus Alan Matthews as we head now down towards Sector 2. One of the few, I say few, there's not many corners on this track really. It's one of the bigger, shall we say, overtaking opportunities on this track. The others being Turn 4, Turn 1 and the end of Sector 2, another important one. Some of the twistier stuff here that I'm going through now, you don't really want to try and overtake. You can, of course, if you're feeling particularly brave, but as we've seen in the case of Lewis Hamilton and Alex Albon, it can be a little bit riskier. The track narrows ever so slightly, the corners get tighter, and it can bring an end to your race. So, early on in the lap, or through this section here that we're travelling through now, is really your primary overtaking spot. And this is an important corner exit that we're going through now. Do we have everyone going through it in just a moment's time? We don't just yet, so wait until the rest of the field is going to prove it here. But here we're seeing a potential overtaking opportunity. It's from Alan Matthews, having a look up the inside, thinks a little bit late on perhaps, and does back out for it at the very end. But good to see him sticking a nose in already means the pressure is now on Paul Brady. Speaking of pressure, there's plenty of pressure as well on Alex Smith as we head down towards Turn 4 as well. Of course, all this battling is very much bringing Barry Clayton back into the mix. If these two carry on slowing themselves down, the bright yellow car will be fighting for P4 as well. So hopefully we see a bit more racing action from those three further back in the action. But Alan Matthews potentially working Willingless's car a little bit too hard. If Willingless, hope you're watching. If you are, I'm sure you're not at all nervous to see your lovely blue and yellow car, Taylor Batteries liveried car there, being pushed to its max by Alan Matthews. As we see them now heading towards the end of Sector 2, we watch Alex Smith and Jack Hodson head through the same section as well. We'll start board with Alex Smith, actually, as we can have a look at what I was talking about here. Here, this exit, as you exit the final left-hander, or the proper left-hander on track, you need to absolutely nail this part of the lap, because you're suffering the consequences of any time loss, any speed loss, all the way down to the first corner. It can make or break any overtaking opportunities, any battles that you've got going on. Just look at Sergio Perez and Fernando Alonso, and we haven't quite saw that just yet, although we might have a repeat of it here with Jack Hodson having a look up the inside, late on the brakes, goes off the track, but gets the move done. That was very brave indeed of Jack Hodson, and now Alex Smith sits behind. There was actually contact between those two cars, so I am sure they'll be not wanting to get too much more contact, otherwise we'll start to have damage on the cars. But now, using that push-to-pass system, Alex Smith, that green loop over the halo, says, no, thank you very much. I want that bit of extra performance. Going to go late on the brakes into turn 4 and takes the position back. It's Alex Smith back into P4. Not to be outdone, though. Jack Hodson dives to the inside of the track for the next right-hander. Says, no, I want the position back, but it's too far back to make any move stick there. So it's still Alex Smith in P4 as we head towards the end of the lap already. This is another one of my favourite characteristics of this track, just like Thruxton, really. The laps, although it's not the shortest lap in the world, it's quite a long lap, it's quite a fast lap, so the corners seem to come by thick and fast, and the laps just tick down and tick down. Would you believe it? We're already halfway into this race, and Alex Smith is back on the loud pedal now, this time with a little bit more delta behind him, but not too much really so that he can feel comfortable as we get back onto the long start-finish straight. There's only 2/10 separating these two cars, and I get the feeling, yes he does, Jack Hodson has the push-to-pass system, gets the car out in front before the first corner, and that is the move secured. But secured for how long is the question as we head into the first corner. Have the right-left switch back before we run down towards turn 4 once again. There's only 3/10 separating these cars. Alex Smith has the advantage of the slipstream, has the advantage of the push-to-pass system, and I am sure is going to try another move here. Here we go. Has a look up the inside. Who's going to go later on the brakes? I can tell you it will be Alex Smith, and we have Alex Smith back into P4. Not to be outdone, though. There is Jack Hodson having a quick look around the outside. Will anything stick from there? I have a feeling going around the outside of turn 6, turn 7 is a little bit brave, potentially. He can make it stick, but he's going to lose time doing so. And that is Alex Smith, for now at least, in a P4. But you know what? I get the feeling this battle is going to continue on, and continue on it will as we head towards the end of the lap now. Another right-left, basically what's effectively a slightly wider hairpin to negotiate before we get back onto that long start-finish straight once again. And here's one of my favourite elements about using this RSS Supreme Formula Alpha car. It is that push-to-pass system as Alex Smith goes off the track, and this is what we were talking about just a couple of laps ago. One small error will cost him a big time now as we run down that start-finish straight. All of the speed that he has just scrubbed off with that one small error is costing him now, as he has a run down towards turn 1 once again. Has the inside line here, doesn't even need the push-to-pass system though, has just the slipstream and a bit of bravery into the first corner to take back 4th position. Not to be outdone though, here is Jack Hodson riding over the curbs on the inside, says, no, I want the inside of turn 4 once again. Both on the push-to-pass system, I think. No, it's just Jack Hodson. He gets the edge out here into turn 4 and has turn 4 once, and has P4 once again. I'm getting confused with P4s and my T4s. Yeah, as we now run down towards, not the Volkswagen van. Now that we turn to the next right-hander, it's going to be Alex Smith who has the inside line here, but is it a little bit too far back? Are those tyres now starting to scream a little bit? Of course, Alex Smith has been on the defensive for so long in this race. As I was saying before, the fantastic battle was so rudely interrupting me. No, it's going to continue on. I say rudely. I'm very, very thankful that we get to see such fantastic action here. The battle is going to continue on. I might be able to get a word in edgeways at some point about something else other than the brilliant action that we're seeing here at Interlagos. Interlagos, as I said at the start of race 1, just never disappoints, really, does it? And we are seeing this now as we head back on to the start-finish straight. It is Jack Hodson who has the upper hand here, but I get the feeling Alex Smith will be jumping back on that push-to-pass system as soon as he can. Or maybe he's thinking, I've learned a trick or two from Jack Hodson. I think he could be, because as I was saying, RSS Formula Alpha, one of my favourite elements is that push-to-pass system. That green LED ring on the airbox of the car there indicates when drivers are pressing a button on their steering wheel to deploy a little bit of extra horsepower under the bonnet of those fantastic Formula Alpha cars. That can play a really key element in your overtaking battles, because you only get a certain amount of it per lap, and you have to choose wisely where you deploy it in the lap. There could be the obvious answer is to start finish straight, but you might find, as I suspect Alex Smith has, he's learnt from Jack Hodgson that using it down towards the T4 left-hander is actually very beneficial. It seems to be that because you can carry more speed through T4 and T5, you feel more of that benefit, you carry more of that momentum from using the push-to-pass system. However, I get the feeling, despite the fact he's now learnt that, it looks to me that Alex Smith's tyres somewhat dropping off now later on into this race. He hasn't quite got the answer that he once had to Jack Hodgson. Of course, from very early on, he was on the defensive, and now we are seeing the real downsides of that, the real negative effects now, as Alex Smith is into the barrier. He's got rear wing damage, I can confirm, and is now under threat from Barry Clayton. Barry Clayton, I thought, could be involved in this battle just a few laps ago, but as we saw, those two were pushing each other so hard, they were keeping the pace actually really consistent with the rest of the field, and Barry Clayton just hasn't been able to fight back until now. Alex Smith having that very unfortunate off, and it's another example of Alex Smith's race which is not quite coming together later on. The tyres dropping off, he's lost confidence in the car, he's now lost downforce in the car, and he tumbles back towards P6. A great shame for what has been a very well thought race. Looking elsewhere in the field then, it's been a little while since we've looked at him, but it is Matt Daly still in the lead of this race, about 3 seconds ahead of Paul Brady now as he heads towards the end of his lap. Paul Brady dropping off from behind Matt Daly ever so slightly, no longer in the slipstream, but still managing a very fine race indeed. Matt Daly has, you get the feeling, checked out a little bit. Not entirely, he's not, 5 or 10 seconds ahead, but is feeling a little bit more comfortable now, I am sure. We were, of course, early on in the battle between Jack Hodgson and Alex Smith, looking at the battle between Alan Matthews and Paul Brady. That battle seems to have, in the midst of all the action we were seeing lower down the field, seems to have settled itself somewhat, and now Paul Brady is clear of Alan Matthews. We actually see on that last lap, Alan Matthews a 21.1, so I suspect a big issue for him that we just missed, unfortunately. Also, unfortunate in the sense that we didn't document what happened, but I'd rather the incident not happen for Alan Matthews' sake. But Alan Matthews now finds himself in a slightly more comfortable P3. He might not be happy that he lost out at the start of the race, but I'm sure he's still happy with a potential podium on the cards here at Interlagos, because he has demonstrated great pace at some points. Leader matching pace, of course, as has Paul Brady, as has quite a few cars in the field actually, which is certainly going to spice things up for the reverse grid race coming up in just a few moments' time. If we have so many cars matching each other in terms of lap time, I think things could get a little bit spicy here in Brazil, so certainly stay tuned for that one. I just want to have a quick look at the championship as it stands at the moment. Of course, we know that Matt Daly, as I alluded to before, 254 points to his name, 50-point lead over Paul Brady. Will Inglis, currently not here this evening, unfortunately, with 132 points to his name, and Barry Clayton, P4 in this championship. A little bit out of position, he has recovered well, P5 in this race. He now sees himself with 92 points as it stands. Of course, these will change for race 2. Alan Matthews, meanwhile, currently running in P3, has 87 points to his name, so this will be a fairly important race for his championship standings, as he is, of course, running on the podium at this point in time. Then we have the battle between Alex Smith and Jack Hodgson. I can tell you Jack Hodgson, 63 points to his name, Alex Smith, 81 points to his name. So again, another important race for perhaps not the overall championship picture, but some smaller championship battles going on within the standings there. As we see, Jack Hodgson will be closing up on Alex Smith, who is just 18 points ahead. So this will certainly get interesting indeed. It got very interesting through turn 6 there for Alan Matthews as he suffers a little bit of oversteer. The back end stepping out on him, I suspect, now with 5 minutes to go in this race. A combination of the cars getting lighter through lower fuel loads and the grip starting to drop off, the tyre temperatures being quite high for quite some time now, means that the cars will probably get a little bit slidey here, which will certainly add an element of surprise for a couple of drivers as we're on board at the moment with Jack Hodgson not too far behind at all. Alan Matthews, I get the feeling he's closed up somewhat. If we turn around and compare their pace, Alan Matthews, I think, now really struggling with the car. We saw a few laps ago a 21 posted for him, and now we see Alan Matthews still in the 20s, so his pace seems to have completely vanished, as have a couple of cars, their pace as well. Alex Smith in the 21s, Paul Milne in the 20s, Guy Swarbrick in the 21s as well. A few drivers seem to have managed their tyres really well in this race. We're seeing Paul Brady, Matt Daly, Jack Hodson and Barry Clayton still in the 17s. So we're seeing quite a pace delta actually between cars that managed to maintain their tyres and cars that are starting to suffer now late on in this race, which could turn things around in the final few laps as we have just under 5 minutes to go. Certainly, I think arguably the biggest change will be between the cars that we're looking at here, heading down towards turn 6, turn 7. Jack Hodson and Alan Matthews, just a couple of seconds separating them now, and at this current pace you have to say it's going to be Alan Matthews who really loses out here with a 1.5 second delta between the two cars. So let's see how this battle forms as Jack Hodson, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, is looking to improve once again. As we now head back onto that start-finish straight, we see Jack Hodson wiggling a little bit, deciding where he's going to go. They make contact down the start-finish straight, actually high speed there. Very luckily, no major ill effects from it. I can tell you Alan Matthews has actually had, I think, an off a few laps ago. It might not be a tyre kind of wear. It might just be he's got no error on the car at all. Front and rear wing in the red in terms of damage, both on the push-to-pass system now as we head down towards turn 4. It's going to be Jack Hodson who tries a move around the outside. That'll be very brave. He can make it stick. He can make it stick as Alan Matthews goes a little bit wide. The car squiggling about all over the curbs there, and we see it's Jack Hodson up into P3. A podium, which is something we haven't seen too much from Jack Hodson so far this season, will be, I think, well deserved for him this evening so far. He's led a fantastic, well, not led, of course, he's led his own race rather well, it must be said, and he's reaping the rewards of that. I just get the feeling with that damage, Alan Matthews has no real response at this point in time. As you see Paul Brady crossing the line there to start another lap. It has been a brilliant race for Jack Hodson, and I think that battle ended about as quickly as we would have expected between the two cars, giving the pace delta that we are seeing now at this stage in the race between some cars. I should mention, in terms of outright pace, Matt Daly absolutely storming the field. A 15.5 sees him clearly the quickest car in terms of outright pace on track. In terms of current pace as well, he is matched only by Paul Brady, who's about 0.2 of a lap quicker at this stage in the race. But I get the feeling with so little to go, not too much that he can do really from here. So perhaps as is to be expected at this point in the championship. Class of the field, I was about to say, but Matt Daly, my heart goes out to you. Commentator's curse in full effect once again, leading this race for so long, doing such a good job, now sees himself inside the barrier, inside the wall on the inside of the track, and drops back to P2. In the grand scheme of things, it's not actually too much of a drop, but you've got to feel for him. Led such a good race, and that one small error has cost him big time. But, you know, to finish the race first you have to finish, and it looks to be that Paul Brady is going to be one to do that finishing in first, as well as he has Guy Swarbrick for a little bit of a tow here, and heads down the start-finish straight in the lead of this race. In terms of things you wouldn't have expected, ladies and gentlemen, this has to be up there as we head through the first corner with Paul Brady now leading this battle. Guy Swarbrick in the middle here. This could cause a little bit of upset for Matt Daly if he doesn't get out of the way. I think he will, though, as Matt Daly can use him as a bit of a tow, in fact, to try and bring him closer towards Paul Brady up in front. This has really turned things on its head, ladies and gentlemen. Now 1.5 seconds separating these two cars on the final lap of the race. Who will take victory in the end in terms of their pace? Well, of course, as we were discussing in the middle of all of that, it is Matt Daly who wins out in terms of outright pace, but now clearly has nothing left in that car. Has damage to carry as well. Was on the inside of the track there. I don't know if you just caught at turn 7. And it is all over for Matt Daly. What a shame. The rear end stepping out on him around about this part of the lap, bringing his hopes of a race win in race 1 to a close. As we head around what is the final proper corner on track, it is Paul Brady who leads down onto that start-finish straight. And I am sure he is filled with joy and filled with delight as he gets on that push-to-pass system, heads down towards the checkered flag, and takes the Race 1 victory. Congratulations, Paul Brady. A fantastic drive, a well-executed race, and you were rewarded with a race win in the end. Commiserations, Matt Daly. Held it for so long and held it so well until one small error really brought it all to a close. Again, more excellent racecraft on display from Jack Cotton as he comes home to take P3 in the end, rounding out the podium there. Commiserations as well to Alan Matthews. Fantastic battling, but unfortunately the car just not underneath him towards the end. Comes home P4. Barry Clayton in the end will take P5. A decent recovery given how the race started for him, and after some fantastic battling, one small error. In fact, we see him under pressure from Paul Millman here, so I suspect another error in there somewhere. Sees Alex Smith come home P6 in the end with Paul Millman in tow. P7 Dice Robert classified P8 in the end. In fact, we're going to have a very close battle here. That was a near photo finish, ladies and gentlemen. Just 0.08 of a second separating Alex Smith and Paul Millman. It does go to Alex Smith in the end, but for a second we thought that Paul Millman could take P6. It wasn't to be, and the reverse grid order stays the same as what we were looking at, which of course, reverse grid race we have in just a few moments' time. As Matt Daly, I think, sliding at the end of the race, demonstrating what went wrong for him just a couple of laps ago. So thank you for that, Matt Daly. In fact, you might not be even intending this. It might just be, you know, how the car is now driving towards the end of this race. But after what has been an action-packed race 1, I'm very much looking forward to now the reverse grid race coming up in just a few moments' time. So we'll catch you here on the grid, ready for race 2. Don't go anywhere. And welcome back to the action, ladies and gentlemen. Just over 30 seconds to go now until lights out, so here we'll have a look at what the grid has formed up to be. On the front row, it is Jack Hodson and Matt Daly, which is a little bit of a surprise. Not sure what's gone on there. Then we have Alex Smith and Alan Matthews on the second row, Barry Clayton, Paul Millman third row, and then Paul Brady, Guy Swarbrick rounding out the field. So we seem to have a just completely mixed grid rather than a reverse grid, which changes things up even more. Even more excitement for us. What is not to like about that? So as we get ready, the revs begin to rise. We'll be looking to see how the drivers are changing their strategies, you know, looking after the tyres a little bit better. Maybe fuel loads were playing a part of this as well. We'll see as we have unfortunate dropouts there. We also have 6 red lights on the gantry, and we are away for race 2 here at Interlagos. Drivers already using that push-to-pass system. It's Paul Millman and Alex Smith. We get a strong getaway here into the first corner. Paul Brady and Matt Daly actually making contact. We didn't see much of that in the first race. We've now seen it in the second race. Alan Matthews actually dropping back here, and plenty of position changes as we run down towards turn 4. Alan Matthews on that push-to-pass system now gets ahead of Alex Smith and up into P2. Potentially having a look at Paul Millman, but too far back to really do anything. Paul Millman rides over those curbs. The back end steps out. He has to play it safe. He wants to maintain this lead. 3 wide heading into turn 6, turn 7 here as Matt Daly absolutely clatters that inside curb, but gains a lot of time doing so. He really knows how to ring the neck of that car in with an absolutely precise balance. He just seems to absolutely nail his pace without overdoing it too much, apart from towards the end of race 1. But pretend that never happened. As we head towards the end of the lap already now. We see a slow-moving car there. I believe that was Paul Brady. I'm not sure if he had a bit of an off or was just running a little bit slower. Either way, now dropping back to P6, so not the start that he would have wanted from this reverse grid race. As we see, Alan Matthews and Paul Millman now neck and neck going around the outside. Alan Matthews gets first position. Do we have any push-to-pass system left to use for either cars? It's going to be Paul Millman who has the inside. No, it won't be. There's a bit of a switch back there as Paul Millman has a look around the outside. Alan Matthews takes the inside and secures the position. In all of this, we can see Matt Daly in the background hunting around, looking where he's going to stick the nose to try and get the position as he makes contact with Paul Millman there. Gets darted off track, doesn't lose out too much time as a result, but is rather under pressure from Alex Smith and Jack Hodson. Now the top 5 all separated by 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. Would you believe it? There's contact again between Paul Millman and Matt Daly. Elbows seem to be getting wider and wider as they get stuck out, so I think 1 or 2 of the drivers might have to think about just backing off a little bit now and waiting until later on to make that move or to make that overtake attempt once again. We've got 22 minutes to go in this race. It doesn't all need to be done in the first couple of laps, especially when we're seeing the likes of Matt Daly have impressive straight line performance and seem to be really eager on the brakes as well. That might be what we've just seen there as he gets ahead of Paul Millman. Was confident that the car was going to turn in, going to be able to dive on the brakes as well without a lockup. We haven't seen any of really from Matt Daly, I believe, so far this evening, and he was able to get into P2 in the end. Alan Matthews, in the meanwhile, has been able to capitalise on all the battling going on behind him, has built a 1.5 second lead, and now it's Matt Daly's job to close that gap up in the next lap or so. I'll try that again, and bring that charge to Alan Matthews now. Paul Millman seems to be a slight sitting duck here into the 1 minute 20s. It's not often, because Paul Millman's obviously progressed quite a bit since. If you think back to a few seasons ago when we were in the Tartars, Paul Millman would be not necessarily back marker, but at least lower midfield. And now what we're seeing is Paul Millman is a strong mid to upper midfield driver. He's not quite getting the advantage that he would usually get in the reverse grid races. He has got that advantage once again in this race, and potentially he's just not used to that fighting for the lead once again. And he's starting to drop back ever so slightly in this race. Still running in P3 at the moment, but I think acting as a little bit of a cork in the bottle potentially. We'll see how Alex Smith negotiates this next part of the race, because it's going to be very interesting for him. He wants, of course, to get past Paul Millman. Off the evidence we saw in race 1, he is a faster car than Paul Millman when the car is in a good window. Of course, towards the end of the race, it wasn't in a good window, and he's battling Paul Millman once again. But he needs to balance keeping up with Paul Millman while also defending against Jack Hodson, because he needs to defend well, and it does look like he's been able to here, because we see Jack Hodson gets ahead, and in the battle between Alex Smith and Jack Hodson, the battle is a little bit shorter than what we had last time around, and it is Jack Hodson up into P4. This battling, actually we're saying he might be a cork in the bottle, this battling is helping Paul Millman out immensely here, I was going to say, but there is Jack Hodson, who in just the past couple of corners is hot on Paul Millman's heels here. He's straight up against that gearbox, and it's going to be 3 wide into turn 4, ladies and gentlemen. Contact between Alex Smith and Paul Millman under braking there, as Jack Hodgson wins out, is the big winner here. Really, or is he? Because it seems to be by going a little bit off track. Alex Smith and Paul Millman have been able to carry a lot of speed, and now this brings Paul Brady into the mix. It's a 4-way battle for P3 all of a sudden. This is going to be very interesting, ladies and gentlemen, as the entire midfield is occupying the same part of the track, heading towards the end of the lap already. And it's going to be Paul Millman on the inside of Paul Brady here. No, it won't be. There's Alex Smith, who says, no, I'm taking the inside line. Thank you very much. Is now fighting with Paul Brady. Meanwhile, Jack Hodgson is out in the distance with a nice 1.5 second margin. So now the battling, it's between Alex Smith and Paul Brady towards the end of the lap. And Alex Smith, in the same place we saw him get spat off, or maybe not get spat off, or at least in the same place we saw him going off-roading last time, we now see him off the track once again and down in P6. A disaster for him in this race. Here he is now battling against Guy Swarbrick. Of course, Guy Swarbrick has the benefit of the extra momentum onto the start, finish straight, and tyres that aren't covered in dirt and grass. So he should have a bit more grip heading into this first corner. A little bit early on the brakes for Alex Smith's liking, potentially, as seemed to panic Alex Smith a little bit. He jabbed the brakes there, locked up all 4 wheels. Doesn't want to do that too many times, as he'll start to completely annihilate his tyres. Of course, we don't run ABS in the championship like we do in some of the touring cars, because, well, it's a proper Formula car. You don't want ABS, of course, locking up the wheels like that as he goes up the inside of Guy Swarbrick here, and actually has Paul Brady for company. So I suspect Paul Brady, yes, he has had an try it again. He said incident like Charles Leclerc likes to, as he has, of course, has an issue. Paul Brady. We can see he's got no front wing at all. He's brought into the mix here in this battle for P6 all of a sudden. Or what will be the battle for P5, as we see Paul Brady now heading towards the end of the lap. There's about 7 seconds between P4 and P5 now. This, after Jack Hodgson has jumped into P3, must be cause for a bit of a breather for Paul Millman now, who's about 3 seconds down on Jack Hodgson, but is, perhaps more importantly for his race, about 7 seconds ahead of Paul Brady. As we go on board with Alex Smith and Guy Swarbrick. Guy Swarbrick was the car out in front. He has to dive into the pits, though, and I can tell you why that is. He ended up having an incident with a barrier at 180 kilometers an hour. That has completely and utterly destroyed his car, I can tell you. And that is Guy Swarbrick, for all intents and purposes, out of this race, unfortunately. Shame. This was what looked to be a nice competitive race for him, and he now has to dive into the pits as a result. As we go back on board, I was saying, with the leaders, I was about to say, rather, that Alan Matthews seems to have the upper hand on Matt Daly so far, but I can tell you that on that last sector alone, Matt Daly just made half a second up, a 15.7, of course, purple, the fastest second one we've seen so far, and Alan Matthews, the pace seems to have disappeared from his car ever so slightly. Maybe pushing those tyres a little bit too much early on in the race, losing out through sector 2 as well, albeit not Matt Daly's best either. Matt Daly currently predicted a 16.3. Meanwhile, Alan Matthews is running in the mid 17s. So it has been a great lap for Matt Daly's charge toward the lead of this race. And it goes back to what we were talking about before. He hasn't tried to push on too early. He might have waited a little bit for Alan Matthews to eat a bit more of his tyres up, use a bit more of that fuel load, maybe become a bit more fatigued in the car. And now it's Matt Daly's opportunity to pounce, as there we have the DNF from Guy Swarbrick, which is a shame to see, as Matt Daly potentially overcooking it ever so slightly outside out of turn 4 there, although if you're going to overcook it anywhere on track, that runoff is arguably the safest place. We've seen many overtake in real world racing done there as well, yeah, you get a nice big runoff and can keep the power on if you go off the track there. Matt Daly doesn't want to go off the track here once again, as he has done in the past, because it's only 1.2 seconds off Alan Matthews. But speaking of close cars on track, it's Paul Brady and Alex Smith once again as we head now around the middle sector. On the last laps, these cars were in the 21s, as Paul Brady wants to try and get ahead of Alex Smith. This is actually not really the reverse grid race that Paul Brady would have wanted. We saw great pace from him in the first race, but I think any hopes of a podium have been pretty much dashed for him in this second race. He's wasted any type of clean running or any type of strong tyre health that he had early on in this race, trying to fight his way through the field and getting caught up in some battles. And unfortunately for him, that is going to result in a P6. While everyone may say, you know, you need massive fields in order to get good racing, the single-seater series this year, the Formula Alpha, at least in the second half of this year, hasn't been the strongest in terms of numbers. That's been our touring car series, but what that has meant is that each position is so much more higher stakes, and the racing has arguably not suffered at all, really. As a result, it has still been some utterly brilliant racing action. I say this year upon year, and I always kind of reflect on it towards the end of each season, that the racing just seems to be getting better and better, and the action just seems to get more and more thrilling as the drivers get closer and get better at their skill. And it's always a joy to be a part of. And as I was saying, even though the fields haven't perhaps been the most packed so far this season, they have certainly been very exciting indeed. As we have more excitement, we saw Matt Daly was only 2/10 off the rear of Alan Matthews. There wasn't any contact between those two cars by the looks of things, but oh dear, Matt Daly off the track, rejoins the track, collects Jack Hodson as well. Will that be deemed an unsafe rejoin, or was that just a very unfortunate racing incident? It's really unfortunate. I mean, it's one thing for Matt Daly to lose a position, or not even lose a position, to lose the chance of taking a position from Alan Matthews. It's another thing for Jack Hodson here, who drops off the podium now. Paul Millman in all of this says, thank you very much. Just when you thought at the start of the race that Paul Millman was going to potentially not do too well, the pace wasn't looking strong, now finds himself in a really strong position here for another podium this season. We've already seen it in the touring cars, we've seen it before in the single-seaters, another podium for Paul Millman on the cards now. As I was saying, this smaller, compact grid can still throw up the odd bit of excitement, the odd bit of surprises, just due to its nature. And now we're seeing Paul Millman in with a shout of a podium. Jack Hodson, unfortunately, I think through no fault of his own at all, really. I don't think you can apportion. It was a very unfortunate racing incident there. You can't really say anything that Jack Hodson could have done to avoid that, really. It's a very tight, in relative to how big the corners are, high-speed circuit. And in these cars, you're going to stamp on the brakes with so much momentum behind you. Not much is going to happen, really, at those types of corners. Unfortunately for Jack Hodson, I feel so bad for him. He's dropped down to P4 now as a result. Matt Daly is able to continue on in P2, but with a knock to the confidence, a knock to the front wing, that is going to be P2 for Matt Daly. He has been a fairly dominant force in this Swarbrick.com Formula Alpha Championship. In the touring car action, what we've seen is Matt Daly really impresses in qualifying, but then maybe the races don't come towards him all the time. So far, what we've seen in the Formula Alpha action is he is just an utterly dominant force in the races, and just able to get his way up to P1 and just stay there and build a decent margin. We haven't seen that this evening here at Interlagos, so I'm sure he'll need a bit of a rethink after this race, as Alan Matthews, I believe, has had an off. He has had an off, and this is going to be his lifeline. It's going to be Matt Daly's lifeline in this race. One off for Alan Matthews going into the second sector. Would you believe it? Now sees him in P2 by about 3 seconds as well. So I'm not going to call out the commentator's curse, Matt Daly. I gave you the commentator's curse just a few moments ago when you ended up having that off, but you're welcome. You now lead this race by about 3 seconds now, and I think with halfway to go in this race, we are of course only 9 laps in, I think the question becomes who has more damage will be the ultimate determining factor in this race. I'll let you know in a couple of laps when we get a clearer idea of what the times are looking like as to who is in with a shout in this race. We've had a few incidents in this race as we see Alan Matthews rather on that push to pass system now. Will Inglis, of course, not best pleased. I imagine his car has been off and into a wall, and also had a scrape with Matt Daly. But yeah, Alan Matthews here, a disaster for him when this race was looking a little bit more secure for him all of a sudden. Arguably the first time it has so far. This race is now all of a sudden a potential P2 here, and Matt Daly seems to be in control as we head through that first sector, about half a second quicker than Alan Matthews through that first sector. So we'll have a look at how that is developing later on. Paul Millman, when he looked fairly secure for a P3, is now under pressure once again from Jack Hodson. Jack Hodson running in P4, but a 17.4 on that last lap, whereas Paul Millman was in the mid-18 range there. So Jack Hodson's been able to close up the gap quite nicely here, just under halfway to go, so the tyres aren't completely dead yet, but are by no means their peak performance. This, I think, is a key moment in the race to get any overtaking moves that you need to get done completed before the race begins to draw to a close. as we see now Jack Hodgson putting the pressure on Paul Millman, of course. Paul Millman could potentially be at a bit on the back foot here, as any following car here at a high-speed track, as we see Jack Hodgson taking the inside line out of the final corner. A much cleaner line, carries more momentum down the start-finish straight, and should reap the rewards of that. Is on the push-to-pass system as well, so negates any effect of the slipstream. Heading into the first corner, it's going to be Jack Hodgson's P3 as we head into this first corner now. 20.3 on the last lap for Paul Millman, so cracking a little bit under pressure, I fear, whereas Jack Hodgson is able to carry on down towards P4. Yeah, so another factor that I was going to discuss was, of course, the setups. This is an open setup championship. Drivers are free to change the setups as they feel suits their needs best, as they get the most out of the car, based on the track that they are running on. And that can certainly throw a spanner into the works for certain drivers. You know, do you take all the wing off and enjoy the benefits of extra speed down the straights if you're going for as many overtaking opportunities as possible? We've certainly seen that in the past, where drivers will actually sacrifice a bit of cornering performance or a bit of tyre longevity, opt for, you know, a lower downforce setup and just jump on that push-to-pass system and try and gain as many overtaking positions as they can that way, and then defend like hell through the corners. Or do you go for perhaps arguably more rounded setup with a more grip on the car, looks after the tyres a bit better, and it might be a little bit easier in the car? And we've certainly seen a mix of that, where I get the feeling that some drivers this evening are running a lower downforce setup and are really pushing on down the straight. Daly's certainly pushing on at every part of the lap, really, arguably not even in the straights. Sector 2, the twisty stuff, he is busy setting purple sectors despite his issues earlier on, despite the tyres no longer being at their best, and despite not being under too much pressure, really. He is quite comfortably quickest car out on track at this point in time. It might be a bit of a redemption, really, for Matt Daly at this stage. Hopefully no more offs, and it's a 15.4 on that last lap, which is the fastest lap of the race so far. So as we have a look at the championship, here is how it is shaping up. It is Matt Daly, of course, with that pretty much dominant lead. Now, from here on out, there is not too much that anyone else can do in order to usurp him. I think the only way that anything could change is if Matt Daly begins to miss events or stop scoring at this stage. As Matt Daly has been on, apart from race 1 and a little bit of race 2 as well, has been on peak performance so far this season. A+ safety rating, the only driver to do so so far this season. 272 points to his name. Then we have Paul Brady, unfortunately for him, last in this race as it stands. It's been one of those really unfortunate races. It hasn't been a complete disaster, but it's just not been a race to remember really for Paul Brady. He's still P2 in the championship, 223 points, and that position is certainly not under threat at this stage, with Will Inglis not here this evening, his nearest rival on 130. Barry Clayton is his nearest rival, who's actually here this evening, and he's just one position ahead, 120 points down on Paul Brady. Then we have Alan Matthews, 99, Alex Smith, 89, Andrew Rammer, 81, and Jack Hodgson, 78. So there's now only 13 points separating Jack Hodgson and Alex Smith, that battle that we were looking at before, and that will close up once again, of course, as Jack Hodgson is set, at least if things remain this way, to take a podium away from this evening's racing. Paul Millman currently on 70 points. His attendance has been really strong this year and is currently running in P4. An all-round decent race for him in the end. You know, had some highs, had some lows. We thought maybe another shout to the podium, but if he keeps it this way, we'll still come home with some decent points and will overtake Andrew Rammer in the championship and not be too far behind Alex Smith, actually. So a really strong season, as it turns out, for Paul Millman, who is potentially looking at a P6, P7 so far this season. Barry Clayton running in P4, again, not an ideal race for him. It's been a bit of no man's land this weekend for Barry Clayton. Obviously had those issues in race 1 and just didn't seem to. I think after that early midfield battle that we saw, which was fantastic, some drivers the likes of Paul Brady, Barry Clayton, and Alex Smith arguably really lost out in all of that, you know, bumping and passing and losing a bit of a front wing here, a bit of front wing there. Too much delta being built up between some cars and just spent too long behind each other. It's compromised their race, and that's why we're seeing a little bit further down. As I mentioned, these smaller grids, the consequences of each and every action you perform are just a little bit higher. So now we're seeing very fast drivers like Barry Clayton who are running P4 in the championship. In fact, the last driver out of the top 4, you know, everyone blames, is below triple figures. So he's the first driver into triple figures in our standings, and yeah, it's just not a race to remember for him. But still, potentially points on the cards here. And closing up to Alex Smith, if we have a look at his current pace, it is a 1:17.2 in comparison to Alex Smith's 1:17.9. So the action certainly isn't over yet. Well, remember how I was discussing just a lap or so ago about setups and how they might treat the tyres? It's the same 3 or 4 suspects who looked after their tyres very well in race 1, who've been able to look after their tyres well in race 2 again. If we ignore Matt Daly, who seems to be a bit of an anomaly in this race, he's running in the 15s all of a sudden. We had that gap in race 1 between the drivers running in the 1 minute 19s, 1 minute 20s, 21s, and those who were set comfortably in the 1 minute 17s. And it's those same 3 drivers again. It's Jack Hodson, Alex Smith, and Barry Clayton, who are happily in the 17s. So I think driving style differences, maybe fewer lockups, and setup differences as well, allowing these drivers late on into the race. They might have the ultimate outright pace that some of the other drivers have demonstrated, but now in these final 5 minutes, we are seeing the action closing up once again, and closing up it is between Barry Clayton and Alex Smith now as we run down towards turn 4. Although I should mention also closing up between Jack Hodson and Alan Matthews. Alan Matthews seems to have been, I mentioned no man's land, left in no man's land after Matt Daly has walked away, and now we're seeing Jack Hodson trying to put that pressure on. I think he tried a bit too early there. He didn't wait for his chance, has ridden over the sausage curb and has lost pace as a result. It's about 1.5 seconds down now. He needs to pick his moments. There are opportunities here at Interlagos, so he's got to wait for them to come to him, and then he can really get those moves on. If he was a little bit closer, he'd be benefiting from that slipstream now. He isn't. He's going to have to wait for another lap, I fear, and then, of course, he only has a few more attempts, really, because we are less than 5 minutes to go to get that move on Alan Matthews. But in terms of outright pace, Alan Matthews is actually second fastest car on track, but that was a long time ago, whereas Jack Hodson comfortably in the 18s, as was Alan Matthews on that last lap, actually. And Jack Hodson loses out in terms of outright pace. I think he's looked after tyres a little bit better than Alan Matthews in front of him. So we'll see how he fares now, unless they are just about starting to drop off. That could be the case, because currently quickest car out on track is actually Alex Smith. Alex Smith clearly responding to the pressure from Barry Clayton behind, unless Barry Clayton's had his own issues. He has, in fact. That was a 25.7 on that last lap for Barry Clayton, so unfortunately any hopes of a P5 have come to a bit of a draw there. Alex Smith, rather, looking a little bit more comfortable if he can just bring the car home safely now. That's all he needs to do, is run in P5. He's got decent pace underneath him, fastest car out on track at this point. He can just bring the car home quietly. I say that, Matt Daly's into the 1 minute 16.2s. Not quite the 15s, still running very nicely indeed. I think Matt Daly might be listening and has heard, you know, this has not been a race to remember for Matt Daly. Race 1, a bit of a disaster, and he's been spurred on by my criticism. It's not really criticism, but he's been spurred on by how the weekend has shaped up for him so far, and is currently delivering a bit of a Matt Daly masterclass once again. He's now 22 seconds clear already in only about 10 or 15 minutes of running in P1. Very impressive indeed. As you see, Alan Matthews once again now under pressure from Jack Hodson as we head towards turn 4 here. These two are certainly no stranger to a battle at this part of the track, so let's stay on board with them as they do so. Oh dear, that was very close indeed for Jack Hodson. Both cars riding over the curb. Jack Hodson a little bit more aggressively. The back end stepped out for him. He was able to catch it, but not without getting within inches of the inside wall there. So well held. That might go to save of the day to Jack Hodson there, to still be carrying on with 4 wheels on his wagon after a very close encounter with a barrier there. Hasn't actually cost him too much time either in all of that. Is able to carry on with just 2 minutes to go on the timer here. We're getting bitterly close to the final laps in this race. In fact, we are now in the final laps of this race. And we head round that final corner once again. Very early indeed for Alan Matthews on that push-to-pass system. The green intake for the engine there, flashing to indicate he is using that extra horsepower. And in fact, we're seeing that Jack Hodson isn't using it at this part of the lap. I suspect he's waiting for turn 4, or the run down to turn 4 rather, to use it. And if he is so, he's poised to use it well, because he's very close indeed to the rear wing of Alan Matthews as we head round the left-hander once again. And we see Jack Hodson right in the slipstream of Alan Matthews' car there. Is he even going to use push to pass? No, he's not. He doesn't even need it. If he did have some to hand, I suspect that would have helped out immensely. He goes around the outside, is just about a car length in front, but going a long way around might cost him some time here. It does give him the inside, though, for turn 6, and that could be very crucial indeed for this battle, as he does indeed take the position in the end. Meanwhile, Alex Smith and Paul Millman are battling it out. Paul Millman, who at one point was looking at a podium, is now looking at P5. They make contact in their own battle, and it's Alex Smith up into P4. Paul Millman might be settling for P5 now. A little bit less pace in Paul Millman's car. Alex Smith up into 4th position here, into the top half of the grid. 23 seconds to go in this race. It's nearly 28 seconds a lead for Matt Daly. Jack Hodson lapping not quite so comfortably, but does take P2 in this race. This has been a really strong weekend in the end for Jack Hodson. Some great pace underneath him. I think later on in this season has really started to come into his own in both the Formula Alpha and the Touring Car Championships, actually, as we see the pace begin to come to him late on. A 17.6 on that last lap in comparison to Alan Matthews' 19.3, and that was in the midst of battle as well. Very impressive indeed. Meanwhile, Matt Daly won't be able to lap anyone in this race, but gets mighty close indeed as we see him heading around this final corner now. Paul Brady very kindly relenting there to let the relentless Matt Daly through for one final time this evening. Race 1 didn't go his way. Race 2 certainly wasn't looking to go his way either, but you know what, he's turned it around and got the overtakes done when it mattered as he heads around the final couple of corners now. In fact, has headed around that final corner, is on the push to pass system just for the cherry on top of the cake, and in just a moment we'll be coming home to celebrate with a strong lap as well, actually, the Race 2 victory. Congratulations, Matt Daly. A strong drive in the end as Paul Brady is classified P7 there. An unexpected final finisher there. But does come home with some points at least. Jack Hodson, as you can see there, completely finished his tyres now in that battle against Alan Matthews. What a battle it was as well, as Jack Hodson rounds that final corner for one last time this evening to come home in P2 in just a second one. Last charge here before he finds himself second spot on the podium, and just oh so close behind in the end. It's Alan Matthews, P3, rounding out the podium there. Strong drive in the end. Alex Smith in the end recovers well with that late race overtake on Paul Millman to come home P4, using that push-to-pass system as he does so, but a P4 in the end for Alex Smith. P5 is all that could be taken away from Paul Millman in the end, for Paul Millman in the end of this race, rather, which is a shame, because at some point I think a podium was very much on the cards. He certainly had the pace, certainly had the racecraft to do so. It just wasn't quite to be in the end. And Barry Clayton, last of our finishers on the lead lap, will come home P6. Again, a weekend that didn't quite work out for him, I feel. But what an action-packed weekend that was, as now we get to enjoy and indulge in some victory donuts. Better than real donuts in every way. You know, they don't see you jumping on the treadmill. They make good use of some worn-out tyres, as Matt Daly now needs a rear-end rebuild on his car, because that was a decent impact between him and Alex Smith. Alex Smith has found himself contacting Matt Daly, I can confirm, at 190 kilometers an hour there, so that is not comfortable at all, and that looks to be that's all we're going to get in terms of victory donuts. That means that's all we're going to get in terms of the racing here this evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed watching as much as I've enjoyed commentating. We'll catch you next time for the final rounds of both the Touring Car and the Formula Alpha Championship. Thank you very much for watching, and a good night.